This is Captain Photo, and it's time for me to reveal to you the newest iteration of my perfect HDR workflow. Now, the perfect HDR workflow is a little different than other workflows that you may have seen from other HDR photographers. And it wasn't until less than a year ago that I was actually able to create this workflow because the software wasn't available until then. So, just a brief history before I process a perfect HDR photo for you very easily. I've been doing HDR maybe 4 years, and I learned by watching and reading one of those HDR tutorials online where you use Photomatix Pro, which, by the way, is still the best software out there if you know how to handle it. And then you needed Photoshop, and you needed a lot of time to learn how to use both of these pieces of software because neither one of them is really that easy to learn. Okay? On top of that, there's the expense. You know, Photomatix Pro is $100. You get the Pro bundle, and it's $120, but you get everything. Photoshop, CS6, several $100s. So my goal when the software became available was to be able to teach beginning HDR photographers and even more advanced HDR photographers a simpler way to make really nice, beautiful HDR photos without a lot of expense, because now the software I'm going to be recommending is very inexpensive compared to what we used to have to get. And boy, the learning curve, wow, there's hardly anything to it. You'll see how simple it is. Now, I've looked around, I've gone back and seen all the top HDR photographers and what they're recommending for workflow, and without exception, they all use Photomatix Pro. And then you have to go into Photoshop after you've tone mapped your photo in Photomatix Pro. You've got to go into Photoshop to clean up all the artifacts and the blemishes and the faults of the image that inevitably occur from tone mapping within Photomatix Pro. If you're really good at Photomatix Pro, you can still make great images, and that's probably why the top HDR photographers recommend it, because they've been doing it long enough to where they know exactly how to handle that very complicated software, Photomatix Pro. If you're new to, I remember when I was new, and you bring Photomatix Pro up, and there's this whole sidebar full of these sliders with funny names, and they do outrageous things when you tweak them. And unless you really know what you're doing, which takes a long time, don't be fooled, it does take a while to learn this stuff, you're going to get really mediocre to ugly HDR images out of it. Okay? And that's, I want to make it easy for you. I don't want you to have to, suffer through a long learning curve and, coming out with, even after spending a lot of time making a photo, coming out with something that's not really special. Okay? So the perfect HDR workflow happened because Lightroom 4 was released by Adobe last year. And the piece in Lightroom that allowed me to come up with this workflow was the fact that Lightroom can process 32-bit floating point files natively. You don't have to convert it into something else. So if you have the full 32-bit file, which an HDR image is a 32-bit file, you can process it right and tone map it right inside of Lightroom. So I thought, oh, well, that's cool. And then I remembered, I thought, oh yeah, in Photomatix, I remember when I used that, there's a little option you can tick on it that says, save your intermediary 32-bit file. Well, we really didn't have a use for that. I mean, you could save it, but you couldn't do anything with it. Photoshop won't even process that thing. So there was really no way of of utilizing that. So what I did, I took one of those files and I took it into Lightroom, because Lightroom says, hey, I can process this thing now. And wow, I was able to process it so quickly, and it came out really nice. And the big bonus was I didn't have to take it into Photoshop to clean up anything. It was virtually done. You can do all the rest of the enhancements right inside of Lightroom when you're done tone mapping it. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So you can now make HDRs. You can forget about Photomatics Pro until you've got a handle on things. I mean, Photomatics Pro is still good to have. I still use it. But I think at this stage in your HDR career, I would totally recommend using the perfect HDR workflow. And I think you'll be a lot happier with your images, and that it won't take you very long to make them. And the best part is you can have the software for under about $150. So let's go. Let's open Lightroom. Now, I was on a little road trip last couple of weeks. I went out to see my daughter graduate from the University of Colorado. And then we took off from there and went north up to Wyoming and Montana. And we saw in Wyoming, saw Yellowstone and Badlands National Park. And this is one of the photos I took in Yellowstone. I just stopped at the side of the road. This was a turnout. Thought, well, that's pretty beautiful. So I got my camera out, took my bracketed 3 shots. This is what I come out with. This is the underexposed by 2 f-stops shot. This is the normal exposure, and then this one is the overexposed by 2 stops. So I have a bracket of 3 stops, took it on my D90. It's not a fancy camera by any means. And this is what we're going to start with. So here's how the workflow works. After you get your photos into Lightroom, you select the ones that you want to create a perfect HDR photo from, and select all 3 of them. Okay? So when they're selected, right-click, export to merge to 32-bit HDR. That's the Photomatics plugin that you can buy for $29.95, I think, and put it in Lightroom, which you can get for about $122 or $3 at Amazon. I have the links in here. You don't worry about where to get them right now. So for about $150, you can have this setup, which can produce perfect HDRs. So we're now going to export these 3 photos into the plugin. What the plugin's going to do is merge these 3 files using the Photomatics algorithm, and it'll create the 32-bit file and automatically import it right back into Lightroom. So you're not going to have to do a thing after you hit this button down here that says merge. Before we do that, there's a couple of things to set in your dialog box. And once you set them, you pretty much leave them alone, because this will be the way you shoot. Okay, first of all, you want to align images. Most of my shots I do handheld. Okay, I know you're supposed to use a tripod, and I do sometimes. But if you're like me, it's easier to just grab your camera and hand hold them. And this does such a fabulous job of aligning them. Why not? Okay, so align the images, and I crop the aligned result. Now, there's 2 ways to align your images. If you are on a tripod, you may still want to align them because you can get shake and whatnot. If you're on a tripod, you would correct them by checking this box, by correcting the horizontal and vertical shifts, because those are the only changes you'll get on a tripod, the camera moving that way or that way. Hand holding, it can go that way and in and out, and you know, I mean, not by much, but a little bit. You want to correct all that. So you align them by matching the features in the photo, and you also include perspective correction because your camera can be wavering around a little bit, so that'll fix all that. We don't remove ghosts. We don't remove noise. There are better programs for especially reducing noise. Photomatics is really great at merging the files, but the other stuff, you know, let's do it elsewhere. I'll show you. Okay, now we combine the merged files. I like to add a suffix onto them so I know what the merged file is in relation to the 3 raw files. So I add just an HDR suffix on there so that I can see that. And then we want to stack that first photo with these other photos down here. It'll automatically bring them in. And you might want to check this box, scale pixel values to fixed range. We'll just eliminate a click later. Not a big deal, but I'd just go ahead and do that. If you don't, it's okay too. You're going to get the same file out to work with. It's just the way it'll look in Lightroom will be a little bit better initially when you check that. Okay? So all those things are checked. Let's merge them and see what we get. So it's exporting them now. Now they're all exported, so it's aligning the 3 photos and it's merging them into the 32-bit HDR file that it will then automatically bring back into Lightroom for us to work on. Yeah, and there it is. So there is your HDR file rendered in Lightroom. Now we haven't done any tone mapping to it yet. This is the file. Now that in itself looks pretty good, but we can make it look a lot better. So the first thing I'm going to do is in the develop module up here in Lightroom, I guess I would recommend starting at the top and working my way down a little bit after we hit the auto button. So we hit auto and Lightroom will automatically set your white and black points to the proper level given the other settings. We may need to adjust those later, but don't worry about it. I'll show you how that all works. Okay. The first thing to tone map one of these 32-bit files is I take the highlights and I just drop them pretty much all the way to 0, and I take the shadows and run those pretty much all the way up to 100. And then I'll take the clarity and we'll increase that a tad. Don't want to overdo this because we're going to be adding more clarity to some areas of this photo a little bit later to make it look a little bit better. So we don't want to give it too much to begin with. And then I also run the vibrance up, and that's because that sort of equalizes all the lower saturated areas so that the lower saturated areas in the various colors will be closer to meeting the higher saturated areas. In other words, we get a little more color. But I don't want to be overcooked and come out with one of those ugly HDRs that I see a lot online where there's just way too much saturation. So we run the saturation down if we run the vibrance up, and vice versa. Sometimes you might want to run the saturation up. This seems to be my normal thing to use additional vibrance instead of saturation, because I like the way it equalizes the different colors. Okay. Now, this was sort of a cloudy day, as you can see. What I'm going to do is hit the tone curve down here. Right now it's linear, it's flat. I'm going to give it a medium contrast. You can also give it a strong contrast. It depends on what it looks like. So medium does a good job. It gives you some more nice solid blacks, which look really good. And the whites are still looking really good. They're not blown out. You can check for the whites being blown out by ticking this box up here in the upper right hand corner of your histogram. If you run the highlights up, at some point they'll start being oversaturated, blown out, and it'll show you in red on your photo. So you don't want that. You want nothing blown out. And you can do the same thing with your shadows by ticking the right-hand box in your histogram. And you can see all the little blue areas here all throughout. That's your blacks that are blocking up. And it's okay to have some of that. I'm going to move the black up just a hair just to get rid of some of that. Okay, got rid of most of that. And that looks good. Okay? I'm going to turn those boxes off because the red and the blues can be distracting. Okay. There you have a really nice HDR image. Notice there are no halos. Halos are those ugly areas around high contrast points. For example, if I were to zoom in on this branch, if I'd tone mapped this in Photomatics or any of the other HDR software programs, there would be a halo around this where it's a little lighter or a little darker, and then there's a gradient, to where it finally blends in with the surrounding out here. But it's just a real ugly look, and it's very, very, very typical of 95% of the HDR images that you'll see online today. Just look at any of them and you'll notice in any high contrast area you're going to have these halos. If people haven't taken steps to reduce them, you can do it in Photoshop, and if you don't have Photoshop, you can use the HDR process I've developed to just virtually eliminate halos. So I do notice, though, here's a flaw that we get quite often too, called chromatic aberration. That's where it's a flaw in the lens. All lenses have chromatic aberration. It's nothing to worry about because you can easily correct it in Lightroom, or you can correct it in Photoshop too. But in Lightroom, it's super easy. You see these purple areas here, and the green. There's green on this side of the tree, and there's purple on this side, and those are real common to see. It's where the light refracts differently through the lens and causes fringing, again, on high contrast areas. There's a real easy fix in Lightroom for that. It's down here in the lens correction module, right here. You click on this color tab, that's the middle one, and just tick the box that says remove chromatic aberration, and voila, the purple and the green disappear. Isn't that cool? Isn't that easy? You check a box and it fixes that little problem. That's Lightroom for you. It'll correct that in most of your cases. It'll correct the chromatic aberration. Sometimes it's just a little bit too much. It can't quite handle it, and then you might have to crank up the amount a little bit. And I think in this case, I seem to see a little bit of purple in there left, so I'm going to crank that up. This is the purple control, and the bottom one is the green cast control. So I crank the purple one up just a little bit, and I think we're good on the chromatic aberration now. Okay, so that's that. Let's go back to the full-size image, and that's as far as you need to go at this point. This is a perfect HDR photograph now. It's got great dynamic range. You can see all the shadows. You don't have any highlights blocked up. It's a beautiful photo. And if you were to do this without all of my talking, you could do this in probably a minute, maybe 2 minutes. If you're in Photomatics, it's going to take you a little bit longer than that, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, I don't know, it depends on how much you want to play with it. And then you're going to end up with problems. You have to take it into Photoshop and work on that a while. So this is really a shortcut to getting great HDR. Okay? So, are you surprised it's so simple? It's really amazing. This all came about, as I said last year, when Lightroom 4 came out, and then I used one of the intermediary HDR files out of Photomatics. I got to thinking, you know, it would be cool if Photomatix would just come out with a plugin that would give us that file to use in Lightroom, because now we can process that 32-bit file. So I wrote to him. I said, hey, you know, how about making a little plug-in? You know, you just take the engine out of your Photomatix Pro software, make a little plug-in, sell it for 29 bucks, and be done. Because it's such a great opportunity for, you know, a real advancement, I think, in HDR processing. It brings HDR now into the realm of everybody. You know, it doesn't cost a lot of money, and it's easy. And neither one of those are the case in the workflows that the other HDR photographers are teaching, to where you use Photomatix Pro and Photoshop. That's tedious, big learning curve, and expensive. Well, Photomatix wrote back to me. Geraldine wrote back. She says, wow, you were reading my mind. Actually, we're already working on a plugin like that, and your pricing is exactly what we thought it would be. We don't have a name for it yet, and it'll be out in about 2 weeks. So far out. Now, the name of this plugin, I don't know. It's not that creative. Merge to 32-bit. You know, it sounds too geeky to me. I'd rather have it be something else, but that's okay. We have the plugin, we have Lightroom, and now we have the perfect HDR workflow that you can use starting immediately. The first day you get this set up on your computer, you're going to be making perfect HDR images. I guarantee it. Okay? So, my next video, what I'm going to do is take this image and show you how to enhance it using Lightroom, using the tools within Lightroom to just turn it into a work of art. So it's kind of the next step beyond the perfect HDR process to show your artistic creativity, to let your, you know, your inner artist out, so to speak. So stand by for that here at essenceinphotography.com. Thanks for being here today.